Forget everything you think you know about defensive battles. The last stand at Thermopylae wasn't just a heroic sacrifice. It was a tactical revolution that forever altered how armies thought about holding ground. Discover the ingenious strategies employed by the Greeks that day and how their ultimate sacrifice redefined what it truly means to defend with unwavering resolve. With only 300 warriors shaking the very foundations of an empire of 100,000. Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, a narrow pass in northern Greece where cliffs pressed down on one side and the Aegean Sea roared on the other. It was here, in this sliver of land, that the future of Greece would be decided. If Persia broke through, Athens and the rest of Greece would lie exposed. Marching into this pass was King Xerxes of Persia, the ruler of one of the largest empires in the ancient world, commanding an army said to number more than 100,000. Facing him stood only 300 Spartans, led by their king Leonidas, joined by a few thousand Greek allies. Outnumbered beyond reason, they had no plan to retreat. Why? Because for Spartans, life was measured not in years, but in honor. Leonidas chose Thermopylae with care. On the wide plains, Persian cavalry and archers would have crushed the Greeks. But here, in this choke point, numbers lost their meaning. 10 men could not fight shoulder to shoulder when the path allowed only 3. The pass acted as a great equalizer, where discipline, not size, decided survival. The Spartans had been forged for such a stand. From age 7, boys entered the agoge, a harsh training system that taught them to endure hunger, pain, and fear itself. They were raised to see their lives not as their own, but as belonging to Sparta. Their creed was summed up in 2 famous words, Malin Lab, Greek for come and take them. When Xerxes demanded they surrender their weapons, Leonidas replied with this defiance. It was not arrogance, it was a promise. The Persians would have to step over their dead to claim victory. For Sparta, dying in defense of the homeland was not tragedy, but duty. Mothers sent their sons to war with the words, return with your shield, or on it. To drop a shield was to abandon the phalanx, the tightly packed formation where each man's shield protected the one beside him. To return without it was shame, but to die still holding it, that was glory. At Thermopylae, the Spartans carried more than spears and shields. They carried centuries of tradition, a culture that exalted sacrifice above self, courage above survival. They knew the Persians would come in endless waves. They knew they could not hold forever. But they also knew that here, in this narrow gate, their stand could matter. Their resistance could buy time, spark hope, and carve a message into history. That resolve can be sharper than any sword, and that sometimes the narrowest gate can guard the widest freedom. When the Persians finally surged into Thermopylae, they expected a swift victory. Xerxes, the Persian king, had brought the might of his empire, archers, cavalry, and even his elite unit known as the Immortals. Against such power, what chance could a few thousand Greeks possibly have? The answer lay in the phalanx, the Greek formation that turned soldiers into a single living wall. Each man carried a large round shield, called a hoplon, which overlapped with the shields of the men beside him, spears thrust forward in a bristling forest of iron points. Shoulder pressed to shoulder, shield locked to shield, they created something more than individual warriors. They became one body, one rhythm, one machine of defense. In the narrow pass of Thermopylae, this phalanx was nearly unstoppable. Persian numbers counted for nothing when only a few soldiers could attack at once. Cavalry was useless on the rocky slope. Arrows darkened the sky, but the bronze shields absorbed the storm. Again and again, Xerxes ordered waves of men forward. Again and again, they were driven back, broken on the Greek wall of bronze and wood. The effect was devastating. The Greeks didn't just kill Persians, they humiliated them. Imagine being part of a vast empire, told you are invincible, only to be beaten back by a handful of men. Morale faltered, whispers spread. Even the immortals, Persia's most feared warriors, found themselves staggering under the relentless discipline of the Spartans. The name immortal suddenly seemed like a cruel joke. This was the genius of strategic denial. By holding the pass, the Greeks robbed the Persians of their greatest advantages: speed, mobility, overwhelming force. They forced Xerxes to fight on terms chosen not by his empire, but by a small alliance of Greek city-states. Every hour the pass held was an hour that Greece could prepare, an hour that the myth of Persian invincibility eroded. Thermopylae proved that defense was not about waiting behind walls. It was about shaping the battlefield so the enemy's strength turned into weakness. In those first days, the Greeks achieved what seemed impossible. They made the greatest empire on earth bleed, not through sheer power, but through discipline, unity, and the wisdom of choosing the ground on which they fought. For 2 days, the Greeks held firm. Xerxes, the Persian king, watched in frustration as his massive army failed to break through the narrow pass. But then came the moment that changed everything: betrayal. A local Greek named Ephialtes approached Xerxes with treachery in his heart. He revealed a hidden goat path through the mountains, a trail that would allow Persian troops to outflank the defenders and strike from behind. It was the crack in the armor, the weakness that no discipline could repair. When word reached Leonidas, the Spartan king, he knew the battle was lost, but retreat was not in his nature. Instead, he made a choice that would echo through history. He dismissed most of the Greek forces, sending them home to fight another day. He and his 300 Spartans, joined by about 700 Thespians, volunteers from a small Greek city, and 400 Thebans, would remain. They would hold the pass for as long as humanly possible, no matter the cost. As dawn broke on the third day, the last defenders prepared for their fate. Surrounded on all sides, they fought with fury, their spears splintering, their swords breaking, their shields dented and torn. Yet they pressed on, forming phalanx after phalanx, until the lines collapsed under sheer weight. Leonidas himself fell, pierced by arrows and spears, refusing to yield until his final breath. The scene was apocalyptic. Persian archers unleashed clouds of arrows so thick they blotted out the sun. Still, the Spartans fought hand to hand, using broken weapons, even bare fists and teeth. When at last they were overwhelmed, their bodies piled high in a defiant mound. It was not victory for the Persians, it was sacrifice, immortalized in blood. By choosing to die at Thermopylae, Leonidas and his men created something greater than survival, a legend. Their stand bought precious time for the rest of Greece to rally. But more than that, it lit a fire in the hearts of free men. The Spartans showed the world that courage in the face of certain death could shake an empire. Their sacrifice was not an end, but a beginning. Thermopylae was tactical schooling in a single brutal lesson. Small forces that understand terrain, discipline, and psychology can turn an enemy's advantages into liabilities. This wasn't just courage on display. It was a blueprint for asymmetric warfare, combat where one side avoids meeting the enemy on equal terms. By choosing the pass, the Greeks neutralized Persian strengths. Cavalry became useless on rocky slopes. Archers could not exploit open sky. Numerical superiority turned into congestion. Huge formations became easy targets. The phalanx forced attackers into predictable frontal assaults, exactly the kind of fight the defenders wanted. Every failed charge cost Xerxes manpower, morale, and precious time. That combination, terrain, force cohesion, and propaganda, is a motif you see across military history. The Romans later used fortified lines and narrow approaches to blunt barbarian charges. Medieval commanders defended castles and mountain passes for the same reason: control the ground, and you control the fight. Centuries later, guerrilla fighters in jungles and urban insurgents copied the logic. Avoid open battle, pick terrain, strike where the enemy is weakest. Thermopylae also proved the power of symbolic resistance. The Spartan sacrifice became a rallying cry, not merely because they died, but because their death told a story that could be retold and replicated. Propaganda matters in war. A single stand that captures the imagination can change strategy across a theater of war by inspiring recruits, stiffening resolve, and causing enemies to hesitate. Xerxes paid a price not only in soldiers, but in reputation. Modern military studies still teach Thermopylae's lessons. Deny access. Channel an enemy where their tools are ineffective. Make each engagement favor your strengths. Whether in fortified choke points, dense cities, or the digital battlegrounds of cyber defense, the principle remains the same. Geometry and will can multiply a small force into a strategic problem far bigger than its size. In short, Thermopylae mapped how to fight smart when you cannot fight big. It showed that careful choices of ground, formation, and narrative let the few teach the many painful lessons. The clash at Thermopylae did not end in Greek victory. The pass was eventually taken, the Spartans slain. Yet their stand achieved something far more lasting than survival. It redefined what defensive warfare could mean, and its echoes still shape strategy in the modern world. Military academies today dissect Thermopylae not as a tragic loss, but as a masterclass in principles. Deny access, shape the battlefield, inflict disproportionate costs. These ideas remain alive wherever the weak face the strong. Think of Stalingrad in World War II, where narrow streets and ruins erased the advantage of tanks and aircraft, or Fallujah in Iraq, where urban density turns small units into stubborn strongpoints. Even in the digital realm, cyber defense follows the same playbook. Create choke points, slow the enemy, and force them into costly, time-draining assaults. Thermopylae also left a psychological legacy. Xerxes won the pass, but his empire lost the illusion of invincibility. The story of 300 men defying the mightiest army on earth galvanized all of Greece. In later battles, like Salamis, where the Persian navy was defeated, and Plataea, where the Persian land forces were crushed, Thermopylae lived on as the spark that kept resistance alive. Defense, when tied to sacrifice and story, can become as powerful as any weapon. This is Thermopylae's enduring gift, a timeless reminder that defense is not passive, it is active, creative, and deeply psychological. A well-chosen position, a disciplined formation, and a willingness to sacrifice can turn a hopeless fight into a symbol that endures for millennia. So the next time we imagine defense as simply holding the line, remember Thermopylae. It was not just a wall of shields, it was a message that still resonates today. Sometimes the narrowest of gates can protect the widest of freedoms.